Hey tankers, Taugrim here. This is the first episode in a series covering armored warfare, and my hope is to do the same thing I'm doing with my Road to Unicum series covering World of Tanks, and that's to help viewers improve their gameplay. First up, we look at the Swingfire. This is a Tier 4 armored fighting vehicle that exclusively fires anti-tank guided missiles, and we're going to talk a lot about how to use guided missiles. Several tanks have them in the game and they behave very differently from traditional guns. Anti-tank guided missiles tend to have very high penetration values, but slow velocity of only 200 meters per second, which is about 1/6 that of a armor-piercing kinetic round. In order to fire, you have to be stationary and your reticle needs to be fully aimed in, and your missile will hit the target if your mouse is on top of your target at the point of impact. So this means that after firing, you do need to be exposed for a meaningful period of time while you have your mouse tracking your target. So here's an example of how intervening terrain will cause you to miss. There's no way for me to guide that missile around those rocks and buildings. And then against this T-54, my second missile hits a rock as I traverse the mouse across the rock. So you want to try to, if you know there's terrain, you can even swing your mouse up and over or around the terrain and then, get your mouse back on the target. Obviously here, like against that main battle tank, it's really easy to hit targets that are out in the open or not stationary. And whenever possible, you want to have designate target up on your opponent. You can see the second shell landed there for about 80 more damage. You can hit tanks on the move. Obviously, it's easier against bigger and slower tanks. This first missile hits this main battle tank on the move, and then it goes behind a building. And then before he pops out into my line of sight, I go ahead and fire. So I'm pre-firing before he's visible because I know he's going to expose himself soon. Same thing, I know that there's a main battle tank coming up on this ridge, so I already fired, so as soon as he crests the ridge I can nail him. So you don't have to have your aiming reticle on a target, you just need to have it fully aimed in on something. So that tank destroyer I pre-fired before he even came around the corner. You can also swing your missiles mid-flight, so I realize I'm not going to be able to hit that main battle tank, and then I swing over and hit the tank destroyer, and then I see that there's an opportunity here to take out this arty, so I swing over from the main battle tank over to the arty and take him out. If you're facing a Swingfire or a tank equipped with anti-tank guided missiles, obviously you want to stay out of their line of sight. The other thing you can do is just jam them and get in their face, since they don't seem to be able to target opponents that are right in front of them, or at least it seems to not work as well. The Swingfire has terrific vision control, really high camouflage of 0.42, and excellent vision with optics of over 500 meters. So let's take a look at the Swingfire in a Tier 4 reactor replay. Because this isn't a traditional gun, you don't have to deal with gun depression issues. You just need to have line of sight on targets that might come up over a ridge, so I don't have to fully get on top of this hill in order to fire. You have to be careful with the Swingfire because while it is an armored fighting vehicle and has good vision mechanics, it's very slow compared to most other armored fighting vehicles, so in my opinion, active scouting is pretty dangerous. You want to get to a reasonably forward passive scouting location that provides and affords of both soft cover so you can outspot targets and then hard cover so you can pull back. In armored warfare in general, the damage values tend to be pretty high, and most tanks can 3 or 4 shot opponents of the same tank, so mistakes get punished even more severely than in World of Tanks, and you have to keep an eye. I've got incoming arty missile there as well as a guided missile, so you want to make sure to conserve your hit points as much as possible. And you're going to see me apply the various techniques that we've been talking about in those illustrative clips before this replay. One thing I want to do is just stay reasonably patient, and I am waiting for tanks to come up on this ridge between these two buildings in front of me. A lot of times what you can do, if you know that an opponent is there, you can kind of get your aiming reticle fully aimed in and ready to fire as soon as the opponent pops up. So this tank destroyer pops up. Notice I got spotted. So as soon as you fire your missiles, you lose your camo value just like you would with any tank. It's also worth noting that the Swingfire has a salvo or clip size of 2 missiles. So you can fire off 2 missiles about 1.5 seconds apart from each other, and then you have to wait 16 seconds for the reload. The missiles, you can hit targets at terrific range as long as you've got line of sight on them. You don't have to maintain line of sight for the entire time that the missile is firing, but practically you do, because if you happen to move or back down while the missile is in flight and your mouse goes over some intervening hard cover, it'll blow up on that hard cover. So this is something which a lot of Swingfire players have trouble with. A lot of times when they're firing their missiles, they're doing so and sitting out exposed on a ledge or at a certain area, and if they're spotted, they're going to get wrecked by their opponents. So I've managed to take out the first 2 tanks on the enemy side. Both had been softened up by other friendly tanks, but it shows the real power of having these missiles. And then I use Designate Target on this main battle tank. Designate Target will keep your opponent lit for 20 seconds. It also increases the damage that they take. That first missile unfortunately didn't penetrate. Usually most missiles do because they're coming down on top of the tank, which will kind of negate a lot of the armor and built-in defensive capabilities. And that time, the first missile hits before that main battle tank pulls out behind cover. Here I'm showing some pretty poor map awareness. We've been flanked. The real danger for a while has been they would come down along the J lane, and that's okay. If they get behind us like this, these enemy tanks are cut off from their help, and we've got Artie with the ability to hit those targets. It did take me a little while to realize what was going on. So, just like with World of Tanks or any tank shooter, you want to keep one eye glued to the mini-map so you can see what's going on and keep track of the game flow and make good decisions in real time. These tanks probably should have just supported or moved along the J lane, not so far forward, because they, basically they're cut off from their help. The second they expose themselves this far into the east, we can just pull down the hill back toward the east a little bit, and then we've got them outnumbered. Plus we've got Artie support. I did get tagged there just a little bit by Artie. One difference in this game between World of Tanks and Armored Warfare is you do get the artillery warning when the missiles are coming in. So generally speaking, as long as you're moving, when you see that warning, you're not going to get hit unless your opponent happens to predict, where you're going to be. I still just, not to be an Artie hater, I don't understand. Armored Warfare said they wanted to fix Artie. I think they should probably just not include it in the game, but whatever. It's there, just like with World of Tanks. And this player keeps just peeking himself out just a little bit, but not staying there long enough. And notice, since I fired 1 missile, but I've got a salvo size of 2, I go ahead and reload. And I do that as much as possible because I want to nail opponents with 2 shells as much as possible. We did have a lead. We're back down to being tied at 10-10. In Armored Warfare, once a team gets, let's say, like a 3-tank lead, in general, that team will win the vast majority of the time. And so there's less RNG in this game, and the damage to hit point ratio is very high. So it's much rarer to see the losing side come back or to see really hard carries like you do in World of Tanks. That is one thing which I actually prefer about World of Tanks compared to this game. And then this tank, I almost managed to get the missiles to land on him, but he gets behind those buildings. And one thing to think about is if you're casting Designate Target, but then you click fire before the cast of Designate finishes, that'll interrupt Designate Target. The thing to keep in mind is while you're casting Designate Target, therefore you really shouldn't be trying to fire your missiles. So if you think that a tank is only going to be meaningfully exposed for a short period of time, in my opinion, just skip Designate Target if you want to hit him with your missiles. In some cases, like if it's an armored fighting vehicle, it's a really good idea to get Designate Target on that scout because it will keep them from popping up for 20 seconds. And there, I tried a little bit of trickery. I'm not aiming directly at the main battle tank, and I don't know if he gets the warning indicator or not, since I'm not aiming directly at him, and then I swung the missile around at the last moment to hit him. But I've tagged him a couple times now. He's pretty beat up, and it turns out he is going to stop pushing forward. Now this is a little bit of a dicey situation. This main battle tank has a pretty good pool of health, and I don't want to engage him. This tank makes for a very poor brawler, both because the hit point pools are small, it doesn't move very quickly, and it takes some time for those 2 missiles to hit their target because of that slow 200 meters per second velocity. This isn't to say that you can't brawl, you just need to pick your spots carefully. And what I'm trying to do is get a sense of where that other main battle tank is. It turns out he's kind of hightailing and running now. I can tell by looking at the mini-map that he's heading back toward the west, and that means that his teammate, this main battle tank right below me, is fully isolated. So this is a situation which I'll go ahead and move in and brawl. I need to wait until that aiming reticle is closed before I can fire the missiles, and then I hit him twice to get the kill. And then there's the Artie warning indicator, so I go ahead and move to avoid getting hit. At this point, we've got that 3-tank advantage I was talking about earlier. Really, for all intents and purposes, like easily 90% of the time, maybe even 95% of the time, the team with this kind of lead is going to win. And what I want to do is help spot for targets for our team, and hopefully work in a little bit more damage. You can see the slowness of the Swingfire. This really doesn't make for good active scout. It does make for a pretty good passive scout because of the excellent vision control, but you know, the missiles hit so hard. You know, and a lot of armored fighting vehicles either lack the penetration to frontally pen main battle tanks, or they have small alpha, whereas with the Swingfire you can pretty much penetrate anything. So I'm being careful as I'm approaching this last spotted location for the Swingfire, because I don't want to be out in his open line of sight, because if he fires 2 missiles at me and they both hit, I'm dead. This particular map, Reactor, it's a little bit weird in that it's fairly corridory and the map is smaller compared to other maps, so vision control doesn't come in as much, isn't as much of a factor as it is in other maps, but certainly, you know, spotting still matters. And what's interesting is this Swingfire, I've got him spotted but he doesn't spot me, which means either my crew is slightly better trained than his, or it's because he's not equipping optics, which every armored fighting vehicle really should. I even use optics on some of my other classes of tanks. It really depends on the tank's vision control, and then I fire off both missiles here. This is an easy kill since the Swingfire is such a slow target.
Target destroyed.
At this point, it's just us versus the RD. I just need to go and spot them. And I've conserved my hit points enough that I might be able to survive one RD shell, but you know, most likely, you know, even if they spot me, I can always just pull back behind the ridge, the hard cover, to avoid getting hit. I spot one RD, and while I don't have a shot on him, one of my friendly tanks does, and they finish him off. And then the second RD is in the valley right below me, and that's an easy hit with my guided missile. So I finished with an ace tanker badge for having 5 or more kills, and I dealt almost 2,300 damage with 1,600 spotting. And this is a pretty, you know, it's a very interesting tank. It doesn't play like other armored fighting vehicles. A lot of other classes of tanks also have guided missiles, and they're really great for punching through hard targets at range. You know, that being said, because of the mechanics, you can't peekaboo the same way you can with a lot of other tanks. Next up, we're going to look at the Sheridan. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your comments and feedback in the space below. Take care.